Welcome to the Artist Talk series, a collaboration done by VIVA Alliance and Orange Easel, two nonprofit organizations. Before we begin, I want to extend a warm welcome to our esteemed audiences joining us in this gloomy Saturday in BC. Your presence enriches our discussion truly. It's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest speaker for today's session. Reyhan Yazdani is an incredible multidisciplinary artist designer currently based in Vancouver, the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Her research-driven work migrates between a range of media, including works on paper, objects, social invitations, and poetry to engage with ontological, material, and spatial inquiries around and about themes of exile, language, and diaspora. Reyhan has achieved remarkable success in her career with exhibitions in prestigious galleries such as Shadbolt Centers for the Arts, Access Gallery, and Kelowna Art Gallery, publications in renowned art journals such as C Magazine, and recognition for her innovative approach in teaching the communication design and typography by incorporating the concept of untranslatability as a fundamental principle at Emily Carr University, where she works as an associate professor. In today's session, Reyhan will be sharing insights into her earlier and recent artworks, offering us a glimpse into her creative process and inspirations. I also encourage all of you to actively participate by sending us your questions via text, like here in the chat, and throughout the talk, and engaging in discussions also at the end of the talk. That would be great. Also, your curiosity and perspective contributes greatly to our dialogue. Before we hand over the virtual stage to Reyhan, I would like to express our sincere gratitude for her willingness to share her expertise with us today. Reyhan Can.
Thank you so much, Shura, for a very kind introduction. And I really appreciate everyone making time on Saturday afternoon to be here. And I'm very excited and very grateful for this chance and the invitation. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen so that you don't have to see my face when I talk. Okay, there we go. Can you see my screen and is it working?
Yes, yes,
awesome.
Perfect. Looks perfect.
I don't know if we want the caption or should I turn it off? Is it distracting for people?
I think it tends to turn it off.
Yeah,
it makes a lot of mistakes.
That's great.
Yeah, makes sense. So I would also like to situate this talk geographically and historically and politically by acknowledging that I speak with you as an uninvited guest on unceded territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I'm also a little out of breath, both physically and psychologically, with a lot of, I think, grief and frustration in my heart for what is happening in Gaza these days. And for a lot of us, I think, who have had firsthand experiences of these disasters such as war, sanction, violence, famine. I think these understandings or apprehensions are also in a form of remembering. So it affects the body a lot. I think it affects how we hear and understand things. And yeah, I think we cannot also rest until there is a permanent ceasefire. I'm gonna just give a little bit of introduction about my practice on two different themes or topics. And I'm going to read some text from my notes just for the beginning, but then I'll talk about some projects as well. And these texts are not refined forms of writing, but they are just my notes to audience. So they might not be the perfect kind of writing. One on land. I come from a geography that has been dealing with ongoing histories of war, sanction, imperial and colonial violence, and displacement, known widely but wrongly as Middle East. I was born and raised in a tribe who traveled between lands, rivers, plants, and mountains of Iran, relocating to a new landscape with the change of season, not owning or possessing the land, but living collectively as temporary guests, while practicing rituals of weaving, poetry, and most importantly, from my view, carrying their ancestral and generational knowledge, memory, and history through language, in their bodies and with the practice of storytelling. I trace back my roots in the narrative, collaboration, rituals, walking, embodied ways of knowing and making, to this tribe, my mother and other women and storytellers who coexist with land and other human and non-human beings with respect, resilience, care, and compassion. My creative research practice is situated around material explorations of language. Oh, I think I missed something here. Oh yeah, okay. Oh, that's the way that I can work with my notes. It's okay. But I'm interested in language a lot, and the way that it exists within the body, the way that it resonates and create forms and sounds within the body. And you're hearing now my voice in English, a language that I feel like it is. I learned it at a school, so it is outside of home for me. And I have a unresolved relationship with that is a mixture of having, I think, uncomfortable experiences, shame often, or other emotions. And it is very important for me and in my practice to acknowledge that my existence has been shaped and formed in another language, in many other languages actually. And that that kind of perspective really shape the way that I work as well. I come from an architecture background, and that understanding of a space, that understanding of how we function in a space, how we make memories, how we understand history through a space and place, it really informs my practice even today. I borrow a lot of making processes from architecture, and I'm always interested in thinkers and philosophers who think with this space and who are influential in architecture. I'm going to just talk a little bit about my material practice, just to give an overview, and then I will switch to talk more directly about the projects and just get deeper into the processes that I practice in the studio. As I said, my creative practice is situated around material explorations of language while tracing the path of migration, imperial and colonial modes of knowledge production, and archival practices. These are just snapshots of a few of works that I made in Banff, and I will talk about later as well. The material outcomes of my research practice are often compositions of text, objects, special interventions, workshops, and even gatherings. They're often in a fragmented state, and they come together, I think, momentarily to narrate stories and understandings of diasporic beings and the way that they make memory, they understand time and place. I'm interested in exploring the gallery spaces as these placeholder for my work and objects and text. But also sometimes it makes sense when my work goes into a written form in a maybe publication format. And sometimes it manifests itself more in a classroom format or in a gathering format. And I think I really enjoy that transition, that migration between forms, between mediums, as a way of really exploring what makes sense to a specific concept, what makes sense to a specific material and work. Now I'm gonna talk about a few projects in more details as a way of unpacking how I work, how I start projects, and just, you know, allowing you to imagine with me and I think walk through my studio, I guess. So I borrow a lot from architecture, as I mentioned, and mold making is one of the processes that I am very interested in. It creates usually this hollow, empty ghost of an object. And I start a lot of projects from objects. Objects that I think carried, objects that I receive, objects that I borrow, objects that I see in collections, in museums, and other contexts like that. And they start like as this beginning for me to look deeper into some of the contemporary situations or landscape of art in today's world. So this work has been also made out of one of these objects. The starting point was some reflections over this collection of tapes that I had growing up. And these tapes, growing up in Iran, it was a collection belonged to my father, who had a lot of speeches, as it was, I think, very common in that time in Iran to record these speeches of political figures to listen to them later at home. So we had these like huge collection of these speeches of these men, you know, trying to shape a society or form a country after a revolution. And my sister and I would just re-record over these tapes. She was really interested in hosting or mimicking hosting a show. And I was mostly one of the audiences of the show, or I would just like collaborate on clapping and, you know, creating the sound effect. But it was this form of erasure, this form of writing over was something that I reflected on in this work as well. I call them permanent records as a way of referencing, recording and archiving for a generation like myself, who don't have access to a lot of resources that they can call or understand as reliable. So they have to kind of make up, I think, their own archive. They have to make their own reference to history. And by placing them within a gallery space, or by bringing them into a space that we considered as an exhibition space, I want to really point to this other forms of history making that happens through bodies and people like myself and my sister, and kind of point out to the lack of a reference or lack of reliable historical resource for a generation like mine. And I explore other forms of archiving a lot with materials. I'm interested in working with clay, and it is very close to the body materially. It is very close to the space, and I really enjoy working with a malleable material that later fires into this permanent object. So I create a lot of my objects in clay. And sometimes the projects that I do happen through residencies, like the one that I did in Banff, where I was really both mesmerized by the landscape and also had an opportunity to work in practices that I was not familiar before, and had a chance to also, bring some of those practices later into my classrooms as well. And just, allow my students to experiment with some of the processes, such as paper making as well. Another project that directs or relates directly to my passion for language and as a way of understanding the world, or as a way of expressing, a way of being, was called Untranslatable Words, Unseen Words. And it is kind of like an ongoing research project for me. In this project, I was really interested in the gap between the languages and the acknowledgement of translation as this form of really creating misinterpretations, but looking at it as a generative space. I was interested in how we can work with something that we call untranslatable, and really allow that to have this space of a project, and really allow that those gaps, those pauses when we try to bridge between two languages, to also exist, as much as words exist, as much as translation exists. So I created many compositions that were thinking about that were thinking about how, especially like working here in the context of here, how gallery spaces and also institutions like art institutions are lacking a form of representation in terms of other languages, languages that people speak at home or familiar with, and bringing those forms, bringing those ways of communicating, ways of thinking through a material to the gallery was something that I was interested in. But also I was interested in how an audience who might be Farsi speaker or Dari speaker could recognize the letters, but I wanted to also challenge them to come up with their own understanding of the work. So a lot of the works were, I'll just go back to this slide. A lot of the works were shaping and forming these compositions of text, but in a way that it was not really legible for a Farsi speaker as well. So in a way, I think both of the audiences were put in a position of knowing exactly what the text is trying to say. And that was my invitation to speak beyond words, or search for something that is beyond words, and really think about migration as this also migration to another language, and how that really impacts way of thinking, way of existing in the world. I also worked on, this is an image that is in reference to a kind of subcategory in that research, in which I was looking at double meaning words, specifically this word in Farsi, which is musalsal, which references to both a machine gun and also repetition. So you can say musalsal var to kind of say that someone or an action was kind of happening in a repetition. And this violence in language, this violence in this word was really interesting to me, and I explored other forms and other mediums with it as well. Another project that I want to talk about today is called مادران در مه پیکرها را تا خانه قلم دوش می‌کنند, and heaviness was not measured by weight but distance. And this double title, or the fact that there is a title that half of it is untranslated, because the English version is not actually a translation of the Farsi text is again my way of really playing with language and playing with bilinguality in a way that creates two different understanding for my audiences, but also for myself as I explore some of the ideas. So a few of my works come together as I explore different things. So I was exploring some of the Persian miniature paintings in clay, pushing the material to be really, really flat. Clay doesn't want to be flat often. So really technically challenging myself to create these gaps and these openings with clay, but also another starting point that was reflecting on an image of myself as a kid dancing. And I had that, translated that into a drawing from a photo, and then later brought that into a computer in a digital, format. Created many replications of myself to create this illusion of a mountain or a landscape. And later, these two works kind of came together when I was trying to place them in the gallery space and imagine them side by side. And that is, again, to think about archives and putting personal archives in conversation with archives or images that we inherit, I think, as we have a specific identity that is connected to a geography. So for me, these two are sitting next to each other. And that was the way that I approached the other work as well. I was again working with an image from my personal archive of my mother and my sister, showing my mom and my sister wearing the proper dress code of that time of Iran, and translating this image into a drawing format, and then later creating a landscape with them. And this to me also goes back to the idea of how women within these geographies and histories really carry a lot of the efforts and a lot of the change, a lot of the, I think, events through their body, and how their body is kind of a witness for a history like that, for a country like that. So I see a lot, I play a lot with this concept of body as a landscape. And again, like other forms of thinking about landscape kind of sits beside that way of thinking to just create, two different compositions or two different understanding of the land. Another project that I will quickly talk about is about how my practice also changes and shifts as an artist when a pandemic hits. And this project was when I didn't have a studio or anything, I kind of switched to creating a small publication in collaboration with other artists and other friends who were also in isolation, to see how as artists we can shift, and what is our responsibility when something like a pandemic happens, when we don't have access to our studios and the previous materials. And a lot of the, I think, issues were really interesting explorations of material still, but also just a different way of responding to something like a pandemic. And I will finish by talking about a project that is just happened recently, and it was a reflection on the collection that Met Museum has of Iranian works and Iranian art. I was going through their collection as I always do, just accessing them digitally and just going through them, seeing what works they have, what year these works were extracted and brought to other parts of the world, the acquisition kind of journey. And I think it reveals a lot about where we are at with both archiving practices that we have already in place, and also how a lot of the cultures and how a lot of countries were, you know, kind of ripped off of their heritage and their the objects and the materials that they have to access their own history, including this work. So I started working with the images that I could find from this collection, this one collection of Shahnameh, which is one of the very famous Persian books. It's a collection of poetry books, poetry narrating, I think, thousands of stories about Iran at the time, and mythical characters, and a lot of, I think, rituals and culture is kind of embedded in this book. And there are a lot of visuals and a lot of, paintings associated with this book as well. And I was really intrigued by this one book that Met had, and how it was really, how I really longed to see that book in person. And I was also reflecting on how my experience as a body traveling through, different countries and spaces is different with the body of this book. I was kind of thinking about my own body in relation to this body, and thinking about how this body of work has been preserved, and many other also artworks from Iran has been really taken care of. And a body like mine went through so many different, struggles to be able to travel, to be able to cross boundaries and cross borders, and having these two bodies from the same, I think, geography was how this show came together for me. So I wanted to create that landscape that references, again, the land and the connection of the body to the land of both this artwork and my body as well. And I wanted to really allow the gallery space to also communicate the fact that I understand this body, or I understand this landscape, I understand this, or I remember this land as very fragmented now. And this is I think, a common understanding of a lot of diasporic bodies. That's the way that they remember land, that's the way they remember the place. It's usually when the memories are not, they don't align perfectly when you try to think of them. And your image of this space is very different when you visit this space again or the place again. And I had some of the paperworks showcased in this exhibition as well. And again, they're sitting on top of each other, they're layered, and they are, part of the images are covered, some of the images are extracted, so they're just showing partially what that page was, what that story was, and you're not getting the full picture of what was happening in that image, in that reference image and painting. And that kind of, I think, resonates a lot with how I experience these books as well, how I read these books and how I access them too. It is always in pieces. There are a few images of them that I can access through websites or things like that. And my understanding of a book like that is very important, I think, for all of Iranians. It's very fragmented. It is very much in pieces. I can't even, and I called the show Yek Khan as Haf Khan Esfandiar, just to also talk about the fact that, and it translates to one, let's say, one step out of the 7 steps that one of these mythical characters go through to kind of win the journey that they had for themselves. So, and it's for me to also acknowledge that my understanding of all of these 7 steps is as much as of just one step. I can't even go beyond one step and understand the story. So it's not about who does have access to the I think to these archives, but it's about and it's also, I think it is about who has access to these archives, but also acknowledging that even if the access was not an issue, still living through the conditions as I think a lot of diasporic community live, the whole picture, getting a full image of themselves, of the history, is very difficult. And the format was mostly collage-based work and paper making and print. And these were kind of allowing me and affording me to play and being able to change the, compositions as well. And I also had like a small, I think, label from one of these books that had the name of the Met printed on it as well on the table, to kind of mimic the same language or same language of the museums, to create this, collection and curate it as a way of responding to such, I think, collections and ways of narrating histories. That was all that I wanted to share, but I hope that I can get to share more through answering your questions or talking to the panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Reyhan Jan. It was an excellent presentation and articulate explanation of your process. Honestly, the diversity of your projects and the incorporation of hybrid material in each one is truly thought-provoking. But also now seeing it, when I see it as a whole and viewing them and see the transition from one project to another, it feels like it's like another assembling of the puzzle pieces, which is very satisfying to me. It was very satisfying seeing them and hearing your voice and your explanation. Before I start our panel will start the questions, and I raised the first one. I was wondering if Amy can tell me, do we have any question from the audience?
No, you're good.
Okay. So my first question is, Reyhan, about behind the scene as an artist and your intimate moment with the material in your studio. In your practice, you often work with material, as you mentioned, that are unpredictable and have the will of their own. So it's like the touch of the artist is less visible. For example, clay or ceramic and paper pulp are not particularly tame material to work with. And they even look differently after they come out of the kiln or as they dry up and can't be controlled, right? So despite this, your work and the object which remains from this process has a post-minimalistic kind of or thought out, measured and quiet, yet very poetic aesthetic. I was wondering how you negotiate with the will of your material in your process to create this balance, and how does this negotiation between controlled and uncontrolled forms serve your work conceptually? I also deal with that in my studio practice, and I think it would be an interesting question for most of the artists who work with material.
Yeah, that is a great question. Thank you so much, Shura, for bringing that. I think clay as a material, or even paper, I really find a lot of similarities to, or a lot of connection to my body, and I like that I can touch the material and it will actually, have my fingerprints even when the work is done. I think it really challenges me, and clay is like very labor intensive material to work with. And I think at the beginning, unconsciously, I was working with clay as a way of really, as I think as just trying so hard to work with a material that is not really easy to work. Like wedging clay is the hardest thing that any artist wants to do, or preparing it to be malleable enough to give it shape and form. And then after that, the accidents that happen during a firing, a lot of pieces will explode. You can have an expectation of a color and it comes out in a different form and color. But I think that was really the way that resonated with me as an artist a lot, because a lot of my understanding of growing up in a very kind of in a landscape that socially and politically is very unstable. That's the way of living, I think, for me. In a way, it's not, I cannot really plan things and have an expectation of how they come out, even as an artist. So it kind of was like I think and I would say like an authentic choice for me to work with a material that I also connect with the way, and I know I'm comfortable with that uncertainty. That's, I think, what I am most interested in the kind of the weight and hope for a result that I have no promise of it, and just that really, and also the kind of the heartbroken after a piece is broken in a kiln, and the ability to just like work again and make again, and just another form, another shape, another format. I think that is kind of what I really bringing from a lot of women that I saw in Iran and grew up with. And that is the form of kind of resilience that within the material is also kind of present. So it makes sense to me. And also it is very connected to the way that I remember the architecture of Iran. So it has very kind of literal and also like poetic, I think, connections to the land for me. So it kind of makes sense for me to work with it. But I also work in I think repetition a lot. So I like to be focused on one object and spend a lot of time with it. And then later just like have a collection of it, have like many of it, and just lose the kind of value that the one work, one original piece has by creating tons of copies of it, and challenge that understanding that we have in the art world in relation to one piece of work and the originality of pieces.
Mm. I also noticed that maybe that conversation with the control and uncontrolled material comes when at the end of the project, each project, when you start installation of the piece, and also as you mentioned, the repetition of the elements kind of bring that decision-making idea of the artist. So I think you have that negotiation all the time, like during the process, and then after the object is made, and then when also the final decision is when they're installed, right?
Yeah, very true. I think a lot of the decisions for me happen definitely in the studio. I experiment a lot with the placement of the objects, but somehow for me placement and these experimentations are similar to writing. Like I kind of put them and create like a composition. I feel like, oh, did I make a sentence there? Does it make any sense? And then I rearranged it, edit it like 100 times, and just like move it again with another space within the gallery spaces to just, and at the end I feel like I am never satisfied or happy with any composition, and that just also, yeah, and that just like goes back to this whole notion of like I have no idea or I'm in the process of figuring out, I think, myself as an artist as well, or just the way that my being also makes sense. And that's why I think whenever I look at an exhibition, even when it's done, I still feel like, okay, like that just to me seems very momentarily, and I feel like it's gonna transition and change very soon.
Yeah,
So
but I feel like that would be your comfort zone to the installation aspect because of your background in architecture. The relationship of you and the space is maybe a more familiar and comfortable zone too, right?
yeah, very true. Yeah,
Thank you so much for your answer.
thank you.
We do have one question.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Do you mind
Uh,
read it, Amir?
I can see Masood is asking, hi Masood again. I can see empty space in your work. Is it influenced by your architecture practice or is it pointing to lost culture, language, history? That's question one. Is
Uh,
scattered words in your
uh,
artwork is pointing to lack of communication, impossibilities of meaning, meaningful communication within a culture, between culture, and also through history.
yes, both of those questions are very valid if you have my book, if you have my sound. Hello. Hi guys. Thank you, Matt. First, I think your first question definitely aligns with mine. So I just wanted to basically reword your question and ask that. So about mostly about the spaces in your work. This is so in my point of view, the influence of architecture is very evident in your minimalistic aesthetic and approach. And for me, this creates the way you play with the titles and the images and different materials creates an immersive kind of experience for the audience. And I wonder if for the viewer who is struggling to take another step to understand, because this aesthetic puts a lot of responsibility on the viewer's shoulders, is somebody who's struggling to make those connections, how would you describe that sense of void or the excavated, extracted spaces in your works?
Yeah, thank you, both Shadi, you and Masood, for your question, and I appreciate it a lot. I think you know, as we work in a Canadian context or Western context, there is a lot of emphasis on representation when it comes to you know, cultures that are part of the minority groups or groups who whose main language is not English or whose main background is not as common as let's say European backgrounds. And the representation, I think, has really guided us to have works that are kind of explanatory, or kind of in a way really try to unpack a part of culture, a part of language, a part of history very clearly for a Western audience. And for me, I really want to think of myself and people like myself who are actually trying to see themselves through a lens that is not influenced by a Western point of view. And it is sometimes impossible being in a context and trying to really criticize the same context, right? Like working here and also being mindful of what is really impacting the way that you see your work and the way that you see yourself. And a lot of the narratives that I think I had so far of myself has been either formed by a very extreme regime like the one that Iran has, or it has been informed by colonial point of view. So what I'm really searching for, what the empty space actually is representing, is that pause, is that silence when it comes to what is the narrative that makes sense to me. And it's not from these point of views. It's not from a dictatorial point of view, patriarchal point of view, or it's not from a colonial point of view. And it's very hard to find something like that, I think, in today's world. That's why I think a lot of the time works are they don't fall easily into one category, or just, you know, because references to, if or making references to these narratives from the history have, or I'm trying to remove them and look at them with questions in my head. So there, I think Masood is very right that there are a lot of empty spaces, there are a lot of void, and I see that as a generative space. I'm interested in void, I'm interested in those silences. I actually created a whole piece of collection based on the silences that I was practicing as a ritualistic act of remembering or thinking or acknowledging that a lot of times inquiries like that include a lot of, I think, pregnant pauses, or pauses that you're like, just, you have no idea how to say them. And Masood is right again in terms of like, they also kind of communicate a form of helplessness in communicating what you're trying to say, right? Like, you have been removed from a specific land, you've been removed from connections, and that is what we call like a diasporic experience. But then what we don't acknowledge is that this body kind of functions in a way that is very different with other bodies who have the connection, because this body has been like using the food of another land for so many years. This body has been like speaking in a different language for so many years. So it is like placed in a context that the connections are not there, and forming an understanding that is not actually required, or it's different with, with the way that it has been defined as this, as even the diasporic body. Like I'm even curious about that as well. So I think it also communicates a lot of these difficulties in communicating some of the realities of living like that.
I guess it's also it refers to the same idea of untranslatability of, now here is untranslatability of the experience. Yeah, very interesting.
Thank
We do
you
have
for the pregnant pause phrase, because that's very informative. Since you don't connect it to a specific just emptiness, it's just an opportunity to investigate more and search more, and that's really amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you.
We do have another question, but we can go over it now or with one of our questions.
I can raise my second question and then we move on to the audience, maybe.
Yep. All right.
Okay. My second question is about the piece Unbound, Shahnameh, which is, you mentioned, you refer to the Shahnameh, the Book of the King. I guess it's Shahnameh Tahmasbi in Metropolitan Museum. And it's interesting because that you also mentioned that that's a narrative poetry, and usually Persian miniatures they have that, they carry that narration. So now I'm thinking about the narrative quality of your work. And I think I'll also see that in the choice of your titles, when you, especially when they are in Farsi language, they have this poetic and narrative feeling and expression to them. So now my question is, do you consider storytelling to be a significant aspect of your work at all? Or if yes, what function does it have? Is this kind of incorporation of narrative elements a deliberate decision, or do they emerge organically through your creative process? Yeah, if you can just maybe elaborate on that, would be great.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you so much for the question, Shura. And yeah, I feel like stories really are kind of important in both creating the work and also part of the research that I've been doing. I think, again, like going back to the idea of like thinking about archives, and the idea of thinking about what we have as a resource from a historical point of view. versus you know, an oral history or stories that we have been told, and it makes, I think, as we are seeing here also, like that's also the way of the way of living for indigenous communities as well, right? Like they narrate history through their stories, and they have that as like this very important component of their culture. And I feel like that's the same with communities like mine, or you know, those people who are coming from other parts of the world. These stories are the kind of these are all what you gathered and put in your luggage when you moved and when you depart. And the collection of these stories also, in addition to all of the dry plants and ingredients that I think I brought personally from Iran, are kind of the only leftovers of things that I have to make sense of myself, or to remember the past, to also like reflect on it. And that's kind of my self-exploration as well, of like going through these histories and going through these, like a book like that, and try to really access it, try to understand it. I know that if I was trying to understand a poetry book like that within the context that had many different access points to it, like through classes, through gatherings, through, you know, programs and things like that, I would have had a much different understanding of it. But when I'm trying to understand a book like that, I'm often alone on my computer, no access to seeing the book, or, you know, just like going through the pages, seeing an original one of it. And all of these like layers are kind of layers that really impact the kind of knowledge that I'm getting. So that's why, in lack of like you know, knowledge that I can really rely on, I really rely on the knowledge that my body and many bodies like mine have been carried through their bodies, through the voice, and I go back to that. I feel like that's the place that I can find something in there, something meaningful to me. So yeah.
Yeah, I also, it was interesting to see how the titles in Farsi have a more descriptive approach, while the translation, English translation, is just one word, very abstract. And I feel like with the Farsi word, there is more about storytelling. Like I can just connect to that easily as a like Persian language audience, whereas the other side is just not there yet. And I mean, not, I don't think you want it there actually. You're purposefully doing that shift and switch. Also now in your presentation, overlapping the title and the Farsi translation, which brings another playfulness of the kind of this translation and duality of the story.
Yeah, that's very true. And it just, I think in all of my work, I really try to bring in other languages that I grew up with to the work, both literally and also metaphorically. And within the titles, I think it's really important, or it was really important for me to not translate. And I had this resistance against a translation that is very clear and literal. And I wanted that acknowledgement between the two different languages and audiences to exist for the work too. And it's not about you know, who gets more access to the work, but it's about like different accesses, because we have different things in common in Farsi and different things in common in English. So, and also the audience in English, they want also something else. Like English, in terms of even writing, wants things to be precise, very you know, easy to understand. Like even in writing, like intro paragraphs needs to be really clear in terms of intentions, and that's definitely like as opposed to Farsi that tries to be vague and tries to be not direct at all, tries to, you know, avoid the main point by any means, and allow the audience or reader to discover by their own, to have their own narration, to have their own interpretations. And I love that openness about, I think, Farsi. And So I kind of like play with both to just see where I sit and yeah, where the work sits.
Love that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Emirjan, can you read
I-
the?
Answered Masoud's second question as well.
Okay, go ahead, Shan.
I think the answer was there, unless Masoud says otherwise. We have the audience, if you want to read that, Emirjan.
Okay, perfect. So Sora has a very good question. I have been thinking a lot about tacticality in my own practice as someone who uses my hands and body a lot to create sculptures. I see that in your practice, the making of your works require lots of tactile element, handling clay and making paper, etc. When you show your work to the audience, do you think about how those tactile elements of your practice are translated to the audience? Question mark. Is comprehending your tangible objects through visual perception enough?
Oh, that's such a great question. And thank you, Sora, for your question. And I think a lot of time I actually like want the audience to touch the objects. And it is even with the last show that I had in Toronto, I placed everything on a table, and the gallery insisted on having the top glass part on it, the lid, so that the work is protected. And for me, it was really important, as you're saying, for the audience to have that form of information that I was communicating through the material, through the tactile, elements of these materials. I wanted that communication to happen, but I think a lot of times what happens is that the gallery, or the way that we see works within exhibitions are somehow not allowing that. So I learned that, I think, recently from the show that actually Sora did at Grand Gallery, that they created small samples, if I can call them, for the audiences to be able to touch and to be able to really understand materials so much better. And that was such a generous thing, I think, to do for an audience. And I really love that. I feel like that just really allows the audience to understand a different, understand the work very differently than just having this space and distance with the work and not being able to touch it and putting the body in a position of, being so careful and cautious with the movement. And that's what usually happens within the gallery spaces. And it's I think I'm learning from artists like you how to actually approach that in my work as well. But thanks, Sora, for the question.
I think that might be a good segue into my question, because it's talking about the relationship of the audience with the objects in a gallery space. So for me, it was interesting that you were so interested in the politics of archival practice and how you incorporate your personal archives and into the broader critique of the system and how they represent these objects. So the relationship between that lost or displaced person and the objects that's placed in a gallery space, I want to know a little bit more about and see what communication is happening between that person who could be an artist like yourself and or just a regular gallery visitor, and the object that's that has the same common aspects, like being placed in diaspora together and having been through that transition to get to that place.
Yeah, so if I understand your question correctly, I think for audiences who are not coming from maybe art backgrounds or are just visiting the work, on a walk or so, and seeing these objects, seeing these kind of compositions, And, you know, it is, I think, for me, like I see these objects as a small pieces of the overall work, because the work itself and the way that it has been placed often plays a huge role for me in terms of like creating or, you know, pointing to where I want to point. But often I'm also I think that's the common place that both myself and the viewer are in, and that's the place of discovery. I'm also trying to discover the work when it transitions from a studio to the gallery. I'm also trying to understand what happens and how it can shift and change based on the space that it is in, and how that really impacts the way that the work can be read or understood. And I think for the audience it's the same too. Like if you know, if they're seeing your work on a shelf, you know, and if they're and again going back maybe to Sora's question as well, like if they are you know, experiencing the work in a way that really tells them a story that is easy and comprehensible, I feel like that's a great approach. But I'm more curious about like giving pieces as they have experienced by me to the audience as well, and see if we can come up with a different even narration, different story. And even so if the work kind of generates that kind of thinking, if the work generates that conversation, if the work generates that even curiosity, then I feel like the work has done the work for me, or what I expected it to do. I will be happy with where it is, because I feel like it's not about dictating a specific form of seeing or being. It's more about actually criticizing that, and criticizing single story, and really point to the fact that there is no single, you know, understanding of this work or narration of the work either. It will change and shift, and that is part of the work too, both for me and for the viewer. Yeah.
I think more or less answered my question, but just to sum up before we switch gears to something that Amy wants to talk about, just to put a bow on this, the idea of there not being a singular answer and the idea of embracing hybridity. When I was reviewing your work in preparation for this session, I ran across this term that you used in an article on your biscriptural typography class. And you used the term applied decolonization. And that was a really interesting keyword for me to actually delve into this visual language that you're in the process of building through your practice. And a commentary on post-colonial studies aside, how would decolonization possibly look in practice? How can it be practiced? How is it even digestible as a practice? And I mean, specifically, what I'm looking at through your work is you have this twofold or two-step process. It's, forgive me for the oversimplification, that is a process of deconstruction and a process of reconstruction. And so in your typography work, it's really clear that you're sort of unpacking and deconstructing the elements of a language, taking away everything, peeling back every assigned meaning until you have a common denominator that's lines and curves that you can collaboratively use to rebuild this whole new form, this whole new system. But this new system always has echoes of all of its constituents. It never insists on any degree of purity or building from scratch. The same thing sort of happens with your other works in Unbound. The same thing I think happens, but it's a little bit more complex in the sense that you're sort of engaging with this entity that sort of, like the artist itself, has been removed from its original context and to some extent simplified and objectified, exotified even to some extent. And maybe the way you deconstruct and fragment it is a lament of what has been done to this object. But at the same time, it's this very nostalgic attempt to retrieve something, like attempt to peel back all these layers of epistemic violence or assign meaning until you get to this origin that you feel like is lost or buried. So it's an attempted, it has a sense of loss to it. But I think at some point it sort of becomes, that angle of looking at it becomes unsuccessful, because if you keep peeling back, you arrive at pulp, you arrive at sort of nothing, because I guess colonialism is such a huge, deep-seated thing. So many layers exist. I mean, it's even embedded in the stories of the Shahnameh to some extent. So that this project sort of fails. And then when you start the rematerialization, you become liberal. It's not a search anymore. It's a very liberal use of materials, objects, stories that doesn't insist on any sort of sense of purity. You embrace hybridity. You use a variety. So I don't see your work as minimalistic at all, if I may say so myself. So it's, I guess the way I read it is that sense of nostalgia and loss is there, but at the same time, is this hopeful or almost humorous embrace of pluralism and industriousness that I think kind of is the overarching thing, that maybe decolonization is not a project of retrieval or return at all. It's a project of like collaborative reimagining, and the more hybrid, the more plural, whatever material, whatever influence, they're all welcome. So I want to know a little bit more about this twofoldedness, this two-stepness that I see. Is it even there? And in your opinion, what does it say about what decolonization looks like? How do you unpack this language that I think you're building?
Thank you so much, Mariam, for such a great reading of the work, and also like the question. And I love the way that you framed it in a way like that. It's so interesting that for me as an artist, like usually I'm kind of, and I use, or this word is so close to my heart, that is in Farsi called qambad, which means kind of like a kind of grief that you hold it within your body. And I feel like it's kind of the state that most of my projects start with. It's like a kind of longing or a kind of state of loss, and just thinking about what to do with it or how to make sense of it. And I love that your reading of it is more, much more, I think, if we can say positive or not, like, but in a way it's more hopeful. And I think at the end it is a hopeful act, just you know, not to be hopeful to decolonization, but being hopeful to a new approach to understanding the world, or a new approach to exist in the world. Or and it is like we have no blueprint of how to do that, right? Like it's just like it's a work in progress, and it's like a I think a lot of like learning happening through making. And for me it's like that as well, like how to negotiate this new state of living and existing when you are like constantly between two words, when you are constantly living between two time zones, when you're constantly trying to relate to languages and try to make sense of yourself in this you know, way of living. And it is a condition of, I think, now many people and many artists, so it's not very kind of it's not an isolated act. And that's why I think a lot of artists share the same concerns in their work when it comes to place, when it comes to history. It's just it's not as straightforward as maybe it was maybe 100 years ago or so, or even like, yeah. Yeah, I hope that that answered your question.
That is beautiful.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
I also see, like, now when I'm listening to your conversation, I see there is hopefulness in the use of material, the way you mold things, or paper making that creates a bond between all these deconstructed material, right? And I think even when you repeat, like in your piece with the mountain, the repetition creates this woven piece that is kind of bonding everything, all the elements together. So I think the material brings that hopefulness
Yeah, and also
to the language.
Exactly. And also in that piece where like the way sort of your mother, your sister, all these pictures sort of like, to use the term excavated, that Shadi, like basically what you have is contours of what is assigned to them. But you sort of, instead of, so you basically keep actually that assigned meaning, but you rob it of its significance. So you actually use the chador and the hijab, and you just repeat it until it actually weaves a landscape, and you sort of reappropriate materials.
It's like a braid. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
very liberated process where like you don't deal with originality anymore. You don't even like attempt to like remove that epistemic violence or remove that layer of violence. You just actually use it, you absorb it, and you build this whole new landscape out of it. And I think the whole idea that all of these that basically ultimately, if we want to decolonize, we have to use what we're given, no matter how violently produced they are. I think that is the crux of decolonization, at least in visual arts to some extent. And I think you do it beautifully. And for me, it's actually ultimately at the aftertaste is very hopeful and even a little bit humorous.
Oh, nice. I like that a lot. And yeah, in that piece of my mom, and I have a lot of pieces that I start with my mom actually, but just thinking about the stereotype that exists for women like her, that you know, as soon as they accept something, it means that they have accepted the violence and they have accepted it and lived through it. And the whole you know, I think the real story of their resilience and how they come together, how they you know, create these like systems of support within each other, and how they like that's what is shifting and will change, I think, history. And it's not about I think yeah, you're very right, it's not about like a sudden act of, I think, removal or, you know, things like that, but it's more about deep reflection. And also the way that I really see them is like, and see myself, it's like you know, the land stays as it is. They are always like these landscape that they really form and shape, no matter how hard the situation is, and that will, I think, stay the same.
Mm.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Amber, you are very quiet.
No, I'm learning. This is such a good episode. I'm learning so much.
Yes.
Is it my turn for my
Yeah.
question? Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. My question starts from where Mariam's question started, but I got into a very different route. So I was trying to think about the process of what happens to the artist when they are working on their artwork. So in your case, it was deconstruction, construction, reintroduction. But I was thinking about how you need to simplify a very big idea into a very small object, and how much thought goes through your mind when you're making this, which puts you into like a conceptual artist, let's say, for example, as if you wanted to categorize it. But it gets very difficult when I'm just looking at the artwork, because I also need the context to understand the work. So I do like to know more about, especially one of your artworks, the fallen letters on the ground. Damn, I forgot its name.
Untransmitted words, unseen words.
Yes, I really like that piece, because I'm very close to understand what is happening with the art piece, but I love to hear what was the idea in a bigger picture and how you simplified or deconstructed it into an object. My other issue with the artwork was that, and I'd like you to really tell us about it. What is the landscape look like in the conceptual art for you? Like, what does it look like after 1960s, 1970s? It became so diversified that it becomes a little complicated to understand or even figure out what areas of art this could belong to? Is it postmodernism? What is it? So where do you see yourself in this very vast landscape of postmodern art? And then tell us about those fallen words.
Yeah, thank you so much for
You
your
can
question.
choose one of those questions. I understand this was a very long question.
No, it is a great question, and I feel like I might fail you in answering them because, especially like in terms of where do I fall on the landscape of art or art history, and that has been, I think, always a challenge of mine when it came to my practice or my art, and even like from moving from architecture to design, because I first started working or studying design and then I switched to fine art. And I was the first graduate student at MLCAR to do that, to be able to really do that. And I felt like I could not fit in the box that was kind of provided. And I feel like that kind of might be my way of like, you know, approaching your question. It's just interdisciplinary, I think practices are very hard to categorize or very hard to shape and mold the way that other practices are. And that's because the process really defines where my, you know, end point will be. I have no, I think, set point when I start the work. I have no expectation of the discipline that I will end up working with. It's more of like an exploration that happens during the research, and I start to shift and you know, move towards a form that makes more sense to those questions, to those inquiries, and that just I think helps me to like that you know, undisciplinary kind of helps me to be open to different formats and be open to different mediums, like similar to paper making. I didn't have any experience with paper making before, but when I was working with this collection, it made a lot of sense to work in paper and learn the process and just work with that. So the whole process of printing these images from the Met website and just working with printed low quality images of a book that I knew how fascinating and beautiful it can be in person was my way of like, you know, acknowledging that this is my access to this work. It is like through this transitions, and then it made sense for me to then as Mariam put it, like deconstruct those images, because I'm not seeing the whole book, that it's not available online. And we know that a lot of these museum practices, like they have like the collections are not like permanent, you know, they have like smaller windows that they show the collection. So I'm not sure even if I had the opportunity or had access to travel, I could still see the work. So there is this barrier between me and an artifact that really somehow belongs to me, belongs to where I'm coming from, to that same geography. But in that project, it makes sense to work with paper as a material that resonated with the material that the artwork was in. Also allowed me to do the collage and to do the, you know, configuration during this whole contemplation as well. And
That's
with the
very
words,
interesting. Can I ask something? So,
yeah.
am I accurate to say that an undisciplinary artist can always jump from a material and a form to another material to another form, just so they can develop the idea further and further more?
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of artists that actually resist to define themselves as even interdisciplinary, right? Like they want to be undisciplinary because it's not about the medium, and it's more about the work as an artist. It's more about how you work with the ideas, and it's not about you know, staying in one field and creating and staying with one material. And that's one approach as well. But I think for a lot of artists, it doesn't, they don't necessarily see themselves just categorized in one space and staying in that space.
So interesting.
Yeah,
That's
and about
fascinating, honestly.
oh, great. Yeah, I think it is. There are so many I had a lot of inspiration from other artists who are undisciplinary as well. But about the work
In Iran or here?
I think both in Iranians and also non-Iranians as well.
We should find them.
Yeah, I'll send you some names for sure. One name that comes to my mind is Gelare Khoshgozaran. She's like one of the undisciplinary artists that I know. But I was going to say about the fallen words as you described them, and I love that way of describing them. I was really curious about seeing words as these objects that you could touch or, you know, or find different relationship to word. I was curious about this language that I was holding and thinking with, and you know, and really would just I had a different emotional connection to. I have a different emotional connection to, let's say, even Arabic script because of growing up reading it. Like I might I have a connection to that. Like immediately seeing that emotionally, it will provoke something in me. And the same with like Farsi as well. The way that words are written and the visual format of it is emotionally very kind of loaded for me. And I was curious about that. I was curious about how this shape, how this volume of a word can be also make physical, and how can that manifest itself physically within a space, even if it's just one word, or it's not even a word, it's part of a word. So it's the meaning was not kind of important for me, but more important for me was the presence of this language, the fact that it's taking space. It is you know, sitting in a space in a different format as it usually expected to sit, both for a Farsi speaker and for an English speaker. That was to me like I was curious about that. I was so curious about seeing like these words just piling up and seeing how they can communicate something without really communicating something meaningful in a way.
What I really like about it is I'm looking at an object that is not supposed to exist. It's a word, it's not supposed to exist as a material, but you're looking at it. And then it makes you really think, okay, and then it looks unorganized, and it's instantly starting to speak to me about what could potentially be the subject, because the object is very clear. I really like that.
Yeah.
It's very strong.
And that's why like the weight of these, and I play with the weight a lot in both like in titling the works and also like the works themselves, because I feel like, as we know, like words have a lot of weight, and clay has like a lot of weight. They're always like so heavy. So I was really interested in creating these hollow shapes that they kind of look like they might be, you know, super heavy to carry if you are seeing them in person, the scale of them, but also making them empty.
Was it like a shoebox size, or was it tiny?
Some of them are big, some of them are like this big, and then once you know, you want to kind of carry a box of them, then it becomes like a heavy thing. But they look heavy, but they're not really as heavy in a way as well. Like each one of them, yeah, there are the kind of hollowness quality of them just creates that kind of irony, I guess.
Where are some of those sculptures, Reyhan? Like those clay pieces?
I have I think I do a poor job, or maybe as artists who don't have like proper, you know, storing spaces or things like that. A lot of them.
That's the problem.
Yeah, in friend's house, or I just had to like at some point just choose a few and then get rid of some of them. So
yeah, sculpture is even harder than painting or flat images, flat artwork.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you.
All right, I can continue this conversation for forever. And I still have lots of questions. Like I'm pretty sure we can continue that whenever we see each other. But thank you everybody for joining us today and stay this long. And thank you so much, Reyhan again, for answering all the questions with patience and generosity, a real generosity. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for the invite, and thanks so much for making time on Saturday again, afternoon, lunchtime. Thanks, everyone.
Of course.
Thank you so
Is there
much.
any other question from the audience, or we can end here? I think there is not.
No, there are none.
Yeah.
Any
They're just
public
clapping for you.
Shadi, you wanted to add something? I just interrupted.
No, I just wanted to say goodbye to everybody and thank you for being here, especially our audience and Reyhan, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Good rest of the day.
We
Thank you so
can.
much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.